Hello, everyone. Have you ever felt trapped by a fate you didn't choose, stared into the darkness of an uncertain future, and whispered a prayer that felt more like a surrender? We often find solace in a simple, profound phrase: "It is God's will." We use it to calm our fears, to accept our losses, to make sense of a world that often feels chaotic and cruel. It is a blanket we pull over our anxieties, a final answer. But what if that sanctuary is also a prison? What if that comforting phrase meant to bring peace is the very thing preventing you from becoming the person you were created to be? What if God's will isn't a destination you arrive at, but a struggle you must engage in? A fight, a wrestle in the dark. Tonight we journey back to a desolate riverbank, to a moment of primal fear and divine confrontation, to uncover a truth that is both terrifying and we will explore the story of a man who, on the worst night of his life, refused to simply accept his fate. Instead, he grabbed hold of it, wrestled with it, and refused to let go until it blessed him. This is the story that challenges everything you thought you knew about the will of God. The man's name was Jacob, and he was a fugitive from his own life. For 20 years he had been running from a brother he cheated, a father he deceived. Now the running was over. He stood at the edge of the Jabbok, a shallow, gurgling river that in the fading light looked like a scar on the face of the earth. On the other side lay his homeland, the land promised to his grandfather Abraham, the land he had fled in terror, and waiting for him there, just beyond the horizon, was his twin brother Esau. Esau, the man he had wronged so deeply. Esau, who was now coming to meet him with 400 men at his... Was it an honor guard or an execution squad? Jacob didn't know, and the not knowing was a poison seeping into his soul. He was a wealthy man now. He had wives, children, servants, vast flocks of sheep and goats. He had everything a man could want, a life built on 2 decades of cunning toil and sweat under the scorching Mesopotamian sun, while serving his deceptive father-in-law, Laban. But in the face of this reunion, all of it felt like dust. His wealth was not a fortress, it was a target. His family was not a comfort. They were liabilities, vulnerable lives he had put in jeopardy. That night, Jacob did what he always did. He schemed. He divided his camp. He sent wave after wave of gifts ahead of him: goats, camels, cattle, donkeys, a river of livestock meant to appease the wrath he imagined. It was a strategy born of fear, a desperate gamble to buy his life. He sent his wives, his maids, and his 11 children across the river, into the darkness, into the land of his dread. And then he was alone, utterly and completely alone. The last of the firelight died down, and the world was swallowed by a primordial darkness. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind through the sparse desert shrubs and the frantic drum. The culmination of a life of struggle, he prayed. It was not a prayer of peace or thanksgiving. It was the desperate, bargaining prayer of a man on the edge of an abyss. He reminded God of his promises, of the covenant made with his fathers. He pleaded for deliverance. He confessed his unworthiness. It was a torrent of fear and faith, a final appeal to a silent heaven before the axe fell. And in that silence, as the moonless dark pressed in on him, something happened. He wasn't alone anymore. The silence wasn't empty. It had a presence, a shift in the air, a sudden drop in temperature, the snap of a twig that didn't sound like any animal he knew. Jacob, the master of deception, the man who could read the subtlest shifts in another man's intentions, felt a surge of pure animal terror. The hair on his arms, this was something else. Something ancient and immediate. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the night. It wasn't large, not at first, just a form, a figure of a man, indistinct and silent. There was no greeting, no challenge, no word was spoken. There was only a sudden, explosive movement, a blur in the darkness. Jacob had no time to think, only to react. He dropped and turned, just as the figure lunged, and then they were locked together, a tangle of limbs and muscle and desperate, ragged breaths in the suffocating dark. This was no common brawler. There was a power in the stranger's grip that was unnatural, a density to his form that felt like it was carved from stone and starlight. Every move Jacob made was met with an equal and opposite force, a perfect, chilling counterbalance. He tried to throw the man, to use the leverage and tricks he had learned from years of handling stubborn rams, but it was like trying to uproot a mountain. The stranger's feet seemed anchored to the very core of the earth. They struggled in a terrifying silence, broken only by the rasp of their breathing, the scuff of feet on dusty ground, and the sickening thud of bodies colliding. This wasn't a fight for dominance. It was a fight for Jacob quickly realized he was outmatched in sheer strength. The stranger's power was effortless, patient, like the tide wearing away a cliff. So Jacob changed his strategy. He stopped trying to win. He started trying to survive. He became a defensive coil of muscle and will, absorbing, deflecting, enduring. He wrapped his arms around the stranger's torso, clinging with all his might, making himself an immovable. The fight became a dance, a grueling, violent ballet in the dust. Hours passed. The stars wheeled overhead in their silent, indifferent procession. The initial surge of adrenaline gave way to a deep, burning ache in every muscle. Jacob's lungs felt like they were on fire. His body screamed for him to let go, to surrender, to collapse into the dust and accept whatever fate this being intended for him. This was impossible. This was perhaps God's will. The final, brutal judgment for a life of lies. The thought was a serpent, coiling in his mind. It would be so easy to give up, to accept the punishment, to call it justice, to call it God's will. But then another thought, harder and sharper, pierced through the fog of exhaustion. He had run his entire life. He had schemed and tricked and manipulated. He had done it all in the name of a destiny he believed was his. Was he to give up now on the very threshold of that promise? Was his entire life to end here, in a silent, anonymous struggle in the dark? A fire, banked low for 20 years, roared back to life in his chest. It was the fire of the boy who wrestled his brother in the womb, the fire of the man who outsmarted the master trickster Laban. It was the fire of He tightened his grip. He buried his face in the stranger's chest, a chest that felt as solid and unyielding as a bronze shield, and he held on. He held on as if his life, his identity, his very soul depended on it. Because it did, the dynamic of the fight shifted. It was no longer about one trying to overpower the other. It became a contest of endurance. Who would break first? The stranger seemed now. A flicker of something new entered the struggle. Frustration, urgency. As the first hint of gray began to soften the eastern horizon, the stranger spoke. His voice was not a shout, but a sound like grinding stones, a voice that seemed to be the source of the night's silence. "Let me go," he commanded, "for the day is breaking." The words were a shock to Jacob's system. It was the first sign of weakness. This creature, whatever it was, had a deadline. It feared the light, and in that moment of revelation Jacob knew. He knew he was not wrestling with a man. He was not wrestling with a demon or a ghost from his past. He was wrestling with something far greater, something divine. Fear and awe warred within him, but his resolve did not waver. It hardened into something unbreakable, and he would not let go, not now. "I will not let you go," Jacob rasped, his voice raw and broken, "unless you bless me." It was the most audacious, most insane, most faithful thing he had ever said. It was not a polite request. It was a demand, a desperate man clinging to the divine in the darkness, refusing to be released back into his life of fear without a word of power, a mark of grace. Now he would win one through sheer force of will. Think about this moment. How many of us, when faced with an overwhelming struggle, a dark night of the soul, simply pray for it to end? We beg for release, for the pain to stop, for the dawn to come. Our goal is relief. Jacob's goal was transformation. He recognized that the struggle itself held the key. The source of his agony was also the source of the blessing. He understood that you don't get the blessing by avoiding the fight. You get it by surviving it, by engaging it so fully that you force it to change you. This is where the comfortable notion of it is God's will becomes a profound danger. When we use it as a tool of resignation, we are, in effect, letting go. We are saying, "This struggle is too great, this pain is too deep. I will simply endure it until it is over." A harder way, he teaches us that true faith is not passive acceptance. It is active engagement. It is holding on in the dark, even when your muscles are tearing, and your spirit is breaking, and having the audacity to demand a blessing from the very thing that is trying to crush you. The stranger seemed taken aback by Jacob's demand. There was a pause in the struggle, a moment of stillness in the heart of the storm. Then, with a sudden, precise movement that Jacob could not counter, the stranger touched him. Not a punch, not a blow, but a simple, deliberate touch to the hollow of Jacob's thigh. An agony unlike anything he had ever known shot through his body. It was a white-hot, searing pain, as if a bolt of lightning had struck his hip. His leg gave way. The muscle and sinew connecting his leg to his hip socket were torn. He cried out, a raw, wounded sound that was swallowed by the vast emptiness of the desert. He could no longer stand on his own. His strength was gone. He was broken, and yet he did not let go. He slumped against the divine being, hanging from him now, his full weight supported by the very one who had wounded him. He was crippled, but his grip remained. He was defeated in body, but his will was triumphant. The blessing comes with a wound. The transformation is inseparable from the trauma. We want our spiritual growth to be clean, uplifting, a series of aha moments that make us feel better. We want the victory without the scars. But Jacob's story tells us a more brutal, more honest truth. The moments that define us, that rename us, are often the moments that break us. The wound is not a sign of failure. It is the permanent physical reminder that you engaged with something real, something powerful, and you survived. Your limp is your testimony. Your scar is your credential. It proves that you didn't just passively accept your fate. You wrestled with it. You forced it to contend with you. The stranger, now holding up the broken man who still clung to him, asked a simple question, a question that cut deeper than any physical blow. It was a question Jacob had spent his life running from. His name, what was his name? It meant the supplanter, the deceiver, the heel grabber. It was the summary of his entire identity to speak it now. In this moment of utter vulnerability, broken and hanging from a divine being, was the ultimate act of confession. It was to admit everything, all the lies, all the schemes, all the fear that had... Jacob, he whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He was admitting to the divine what he had always known about himself. I am a trickster, I am a fraud, and in that moment of complete, shattering honesty, the stranger gave him his blessing. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, the being declared. His voice now filled with a strange, solemn authority, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have he who struggles with God. It wasn't a name that erased his past. It was a name that redeemed it. It took the very essence of his flawed character, his relentless, wrestling nature, and sanctified it. God didn't tell him to stop struggling. He named him for his struggle. He wasn't blessed for being perfect, for being pious, for being obedient. He was blessed for being a fighter. He was blessed because when God, he prevailed not by overpowering God, but by refusing to let go until his struggle was given meaning. The wound, the confession, the new name. This is the holy trinity of transformation. We must be broken of our self-reliance. We must be honest about who we truly are, and only then can we receive a new identity. One forged not in our perfection, but in the crucible of our most desperate struggles. If you find this story as powerful as I do, and you want to explore more of these truths that challenge our conventional faith, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us reach more people who are wrestling in the dark, looking for a blessing. Now, as the sun finally crested the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jacob, now Israel, looked at the face of his opponent for the first time. The scripture said the divine being, his purpose fulfilled, began to fade with the last of the night's shadows. Israel, the new man, was left alone once more, but he was not the same. The fear of Esau was still there, but it was different now. It was a manageable fear, a human fear. He had faced something far more terrifying in the night and had survived. He had faced God. What was a brother with 400 men compared to that? He gathered himself he began to walk, but it was not the walk of the fugitive Jacob. It was a limp, a slow, deliberate, painful limp. Every step was a testament to his struggle. Every step was a proclamation of his new name. He limped toward his reunion, toward his destiny, no longer a deceiver running from his past, but a wounded prince of God walking toward his future. And when he saw Esau running toward him, he didn't see an executioner. And Esau, the feared avenger, embraced him and wept. The war he had anticipated was a reunion of grace. Why? Because the battle that truly mattered had already been fought and won on the riverbank. Israel had wrestled with God and prevailed. The struggle with man was just the aftermath. So let's bring this back to us, to our lives, our struggles, our own personal Jabbok Rivers, the looming deadline, the terrifying diagnosis, the broken relationship, the crushing weight of past mistakes. And our instinct so often is to placate, to bargain, to run, and finally, when all else fails, to resign ourselves to the inevitable and call it God's will. We say, well, if I lose this job, it is God's will. If this relationship ends, it is God's will. If I remain stuck in this situation, this mindset, while seemingly pious, can be a form of profound spiritual laziness. It's an abdication of our role in the divine drama. We mistake the script for a cage. Jacob's story screams a different gospel. It tells us that God's will may not be a passive state to be accepted, but an active partner to be wrestled with. The divine doesn't just want your submission, it wants your engagement. It wants your fight, your passion, your stubborn refusal to settle for a life less than the one you were promised. Maybe the difficult boss isn't God's will for you to endure forever, but the divine opponent sent to force you to develop the courage to find a new job. Maybe the chronic illness isn't God's will for you to simply suffer through, but the wrestling partner that will teach you a depth of compassion and strength you never knew. Maybe the crisis of faith isn't God's will for you to abandon belief, but the divine stranger in the dark, forcing you to grapple with your simple answers and discover a faith that is stronger, more honest, and worthy of your new name. The difference is in the posture. Resignation says, I can't change this, so I will accept it. A wrestling faith says, I will not let this situation go until it blesses me. I will not let this darkness go until it has given me a new name. This is a terrifying way to live. It means embracing the wound. It means understanding that growth is painful, that the limp is part of the blessing. We live in a culture that worships comfort and avoids pain at all costs. We want the crown without the cross, the resurrection without the crucifixion, the blessing without the wrestle. The story of Israel tells us that is not the way. Your wound is not your shame. It is the map to your destiny. Your limp is not a sign of weakness. It is the rhythm of your unique walk with God. Consider the psychology of this. The concept is known as spiritual bypassing. It's when we use spiritual ideas and beliefs to avoid dealing with our painful feelings, unresolved wounds, and developmental needs. Saying it is all God's will can be the ultimate. It allows us to sidestep the messy, terrifying work of personal responsibility, emotional processing, and courageous action. It feels holy, but it can be a subtle form of denial. Jacob could have spiritually bypassed. When the stranger appeared, he could have fallen to his knees and said, I am a sinner. Do with me as you will, your judgment is righteous. It would have sounded incredibly pious, but it would have been an act of cowardice, a refusal to engage with the divine on the deepest level. Instead, he stood up and fought back. He brought his whole messy, imperfect, striving self to the encounter. He didn't hide his ambition or his desperation. He put it all on the line, and God honored it. God met him in that authenticity. This tells us something profound about the nature of the divine. Perhaps God is not looking for perfectly polished saints who have all the right answers and follow all the rules. Perhaps God is looking for honest wrestlers, people who are willing to engage with the tough questions, to confront their own darkness, to hold on to God even when they are angry, confused, and hurt. The book of Job is another testament to this. Job doesn't find peace by quietly accepting his fate. He screams his rage and confusion at the heavens, and in the end, God doesn't rebuke him for his anger. He rebukes his friends for their simple, pious, spiritually bypassing answers. God vindicates the wrestler, not the placid observers. So, what is your Jabbok? What is the struggle in your life right now that you have been tempted to simply surrender to? The dead-end career, the toxic family dynamic, the persistent anxiety that whispers you are not good enough. I want you to look at it not as your preordained unchangeable fate. I want you to see it as a wrestling ring. See it as your divine appointment. The stranger in the dark has appeared. You have a choice. You can lie down and accept defeat, calling it God's will, or you can get up, take a deep breath, and fight. Fight for your blessing, fight for your new name, fight for the meaning hidden within the pain. This doesn't mean fighting with bitterness, a fight that is also an embrace, a struggle that is also a form of intimacy. You hold on to the problem, you grapple with it, you refuse to let it go, not in a spirit of hate, but in a spirit of faith that says, I believe there is a blessing here, and I will not stop until I find it. This might look like having the brutally honest conversation you've been avoiding. It might look like finally seeking therapy to wrestle with your past trauma. It might look like setting a boundary with someone you love. It might look like dedicating an hour every day to prayer and meditation, not to passively receive comfort, but to actively wrestle with your doubts and fears in the presence of God. It will be hard. You will get tired. You will almost certainly get wounded in the process. You will walk away from the encounter with a limp, but you will also walk away with a new name. You will walk away as Israel. You will have a depth, a resilience, a quiet authority that can only be earned in the dark, on the riverbank, in the fight of your life. The world is full of Jacobs, people running, scheming, afraid, living under a name, an identity that was given to them by their past failures. But the world desperately needs more Israels, people who limp, yes, but who limp with the dignity of a hard-won blessing. People who know that God is not a distant, untouchable king who dictates our every move, but a mysterious, powerful, and ultimately intimate presence who is willing to meet us in the dust, to let us grapple with him, and to love us enough to both wound us and bless us in the very same touch. The next time you face a challenge that feels insurmountable, and that old, comforting phrase comes to mind, "It is God's will, I want you." Is this a moment for resignation, or is this an invitation to the wrestle? Is this a verdict to be accepted, or a divine opponent with a blessing hidden in his hands? The choice is yours. Don't just settle for your fate, wrestle for your destiny. Hold on through the night. The dawn is coming, and with it, a new name that has been forged for you in the fire of the fight. That is all for today's video. If this story has challenged, your engagement helps these messages find those who need to hear them most. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.